Honey, Panasonic shrunk the camera. That's how one could accurately describe the Panasonic Lumix GM1, which is not only the smallest micro four thirds camera on the market, it's also the smallest system camera with interchangeable lenses. How did Panasonic achieve that? Well, that's pretty simple to explain. Panasonic developed an entirely new shutter mechanism for this camera. The shutter in the Lumix GM1 is 80% smaller than that of comparable micro four thirds models. The only drawback is that the fastest shutter speed is 1/500th of a second, but in order to compensate for that, the GM1 also has a fully electronic shutter, which goes down to 1/16,000th of a second, and that's incredibly fast. And that also means that you can easily take pictures in daylight with the aperture wide open. Also, in order to achieve the compact form factor of the GM1, Panasonic created a new kit lens, especially for the GM1. It's the 12 to 32 mm f3.5 to 5.6, and it's got a very slim profile, as slim as the camera. And this zoom lens itself is hardly larger than Panasonic's 14 mm pancake lens. And again, how did they achieve that? Also pretty simple to explain. The 12 to 32 mm lens can actually be collapsed, just as we already know that from Olympus's kit lenses and from the Panasonic 14 to 42 mm power zoom lens. So when we twist the zoom ring, the lens actually comes out. That's pretty clever, and that helps the GM1 with its kit lens to achieve this slim profile. Inside, the Panasonic Lumix GM1 has the 15.8 megapixel micro four thirds sensor that we already know from the Lumix GX7. ISO 125 to 25,600, which is pretty much standard these days. Records Full HD video with 24 or 25 full frames per second or 50 half interlaced frames per second. On the rear, the GM1 has a large 3-inch display, 1,036,000 pixels, so it's very high resolution, very sharp, very nice to work with. Also, the display is a touch display. Because the GM1 is so small and has so few buttons, you will use the touch display a lot to change settings. So, let's take a closer look at the Panasonic GM1's body. At the front, there isn't really a lot to see. We have the lens release button, then we have the lens itself, and when we take the lens off, we see the micro four thirds mount and the relatively large micro four thirds sensor. The lens itself is also very compact. That's because it is collapsible, just like the kit lenses from Olympus, but still a lot smaller. And when we extend it, it still doesn't become very large. On the top of the camera, first and foremost, we have the on-off switch, which is located around the shutter button here. Then we have a switch to select autofocus or manual focus, and in the middle of that switch we have a function button, which can be customized, for example, to quickly access white balance or ISO. And then there's something which is not very typical for cameras this small, especially when we compare the GM1 to the mini models of the Olympus pen range. It has a dedicated mode dial that lets you switch between the classic shooting modes, but also between the scene mode and the video mode and some custom modes. Furthermore, on top we have the flash, which is also very compact, and the nice thing about this flash is that it can actually be tilted upward and can thus be reflected from the ceiling for slightly less intense light. On this side of the Lumix GM1, not much is going on, but on the other side we have this little flap underneath which we find a USB and an HDMI port. On the bottom, of course, we have the compartment for the memory card and the battery. Now on the rear is where things get interesting, because this is where most of the remaining controls can be found, and also here we have the large 3-inch touchscreen display. We have the release button for the flash. And on this side we have a direct movie recording button. Pressing this button will instantly start the recording of a movie. We have the button that takes us to the images, and then there's this little dial to scroll through the menus and also to change settings such as the aperture or the shutter speed. It is also a 4-way controller with a button in the middle that accesses the menu. And finally, here's the display button, which changes the info on the display, as well as this delete button, which is also a combined quick menu button. Now pressing this button will open a menu screen which offers a lot of options for settings, which is a very practical thing. Switching on the Lumix GM1, the first thing that we're reminded of is to actually extend the lens, because without that we cannot take any images. And when we go into the menus, we see there are a lot of options. On this side of the screen we have 5 submenus: shooting mode, video mode, custom settings, camera settings, and playback mode. The shooting mode menu, of course, has all the different settings that are relevant for taking pictures, whereas the video mode menu has all the settings that are relevant for shooting video. The custom menu offers options to customize the camera, such as the function of the FN button here on top. The camera settings menu offers options such as time, date, and so on. And finally, the playback menu has many options to customize the image playback. Only in comparison with other Micro Four Thirds models one really realizes how small the GM1 actually is. We have it here next to the Olympus EM5, which by itself isn't a large camera, but in comparison the Panasonic GM1 is tiny. We already spoke about how Panasonic achieved that, and now when we look at it, it's not only the width of the camera that has a much smaller footprint, it's also the height, and that is really incredible. And when we look at the depth, we also see that the Panasonic GM1 is a lot smaller. Now, there is a problem with that small form factor, and that is the lenses. The Panasonic GM1 comes with this very small kit lens, which was developed especially for the camera. Now, when we interchange the lens and, for example, put on the 20mm pancake, which for itself isn't really a large lens, we realize that actually at the top and at the bottom the lens is larger than the camera. There is, however, a way to compensate for that. For the Lumix GM1, Panasonic offers a hand grip. This hand grip not only provides better grip on the front, but it also provides a bit more depth at the bottom of the body, so the camera won't tilt when you put it on the table with a larger lens on it. But even with the grip, the GM1 really isn't a camera to use with very large Micro Four Thirds lenses, of which there are a few. 100 euros for a grip, however, is pretty steep. And we were thinking, isn't there another way? Yes, there is actually. Sony offers a very affordable sticky grip for the Cybershot RX100 and RX100 Mark II. And the funny thing is, this grip actually fits the Lumix GM1. As you see, when I hold it against the body of the GM1, it fits almost perfectly. And this grip also provides a much better feeling when holding the camera, because it stabilizes the finger in the front, but it's a lot cheaper than the grip that Panasonic has to offer. Thanks to the Panasonic GM1's Wi-Fi connectivity, there is a smartphone and tablet app that runs on Android and iOS, which you can use to remote control the camera. In order to activate the Wi-Fi functionality, you have a choice of digging your way through the menus or directly assigning the Wi-Fi function to the FN button. When the Wi-Fi functionality is turned on, you have to enter a password into your smartphone, and then the connection is established relatively quickly. And the app looks like this. It is in fact a full remote control for the camera. We have the preview display on top. We also see the various settings that we have chosen for the camera, and we have a couple of buttons on the lower part of the screen. And when I move the Panasonic camera now, we actually see how the image moves on the smartphone app in real time. When I tilt it up, for example, we can see the camera that is recording this video. So that's a very nice thing, especially when you take, for example, time-lapse pictures or long exposure pictures where you wouldn't want to induce camera shake by pressing the button. So the smartphone app acts as a full remote control for the camera with the added benefit of a live preview. In the lower section of the screen, there's the button to take a picture. Works like that. We also have a direct movie button. We have a button to change the preview display on the smartphone app. We have this panel with settings such as ISO and white balance, and it's also possible to access the camera's quick menu from the smartphone app. Furthermore, there's the playback button, which we can use to playback the pictures. There's a button for GPS, and finally a button for the settings of the smartphone app. So this is a very nice thing, very nice extra feature for the Panasonic GM1, and especially if you're a fan of, for example, Instagram, you will surely have a lot of fun with the Panasonic GM1 and the smartphone app. This was a hands-on video with the Panasonic Lumix GM1. As always, the full review as well as the image quality comparison can be found on dcamera.de, only in German though. Thanks for watching, we hope you enjoyed it.